Indie Prime, yes, Indie Prime, on Indie Live Radio. Indie Prime, yes, Indie Prime, on Indie Live Radio.
Welcome to the Indie Prime podcast, and I've got a very special guest for this podcast, and it's Willie Wilson. Willie, you're the founder of the Scottish Independence Foundation.
Yes, indeed.
And you're also the founder of NHS for Yes.
That was 6 years earlier, isn't it?
Yep. And 45 years earlier, you became a member of the SNP.
Yes, indeed.
Right. Well, what I'd like to do is, first of all, welcome you. Thank you very much for coming on the Indie Pram podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to see the grassroots spawning so many different projects. And it's really, that was behind the formation of the SIF, the Scottish Independence Foundation. A few of us got together and realised that there was very little progress being made by the Independence Convention, the SIC, and the movement, the Yes movement, was starting to get impatient about how they should proceed, who would give them inspiration, who would give them some money to get going. And so we decided that we wouldn't wait for the SIC. Although it has to be said, the SIC is now making progress, raising money and organising. We didn't wait for the SIC. About 1 year ago now, that was April of 2018, we decided to take matters into our own hands. We phoned around a few well-heeled people and got a good solid contribution from each of about a dozen folk. And that is what led to the big headline in the National on the 6th of June when we launched. And the big headline was £120,000 in the Bank of Yes, ready to fund grassroots projects.
That's how much you raised at the beginning.
We had pledges. Yeah, we didn't actually have the money in the bank on that day, but we had pledges, and we've had a few major contributions since then. And we also put up a crowdfunder in the hope that grassroots people would chip in more modest sums. And we've been successful with that.
So all the fundraising has actually come from the public of Scotland, the grassroots movement and individuals, nothing from the government?
Nothing from the government, nothing from out with Scotland. The actual sources of money, the individual people are all different. Some are professional, some are business people, some are, various places they got their money, but it's all legit.
Going everything from pensioners then to high earners.
Yes, we've got, I don't know the numbers, but we're certainly into well over 3 figures of ordinary people who are chipping in £10 a month or a £5 a month, and that helps.
Right, that money is important for the grassroots movement to get themselves up and running.
Yeah.
What criteria did you reach to decide where that money was going to be best spent?
There was really only one criterion to start with, and we said we would fund any project which would further the progress towards independence for our country. That's a very wide remit, of course, and as a step towards greater selectivity and fairness, we had a 4-page application form that grassroots groups could fill in all their details of who was involved in it, how many activists, what their plans are, what it is they want to spend the money on, and so on. And a little section at the end for references if they want to recommend or get a recommendation from their own MP or their own MSP or someone prominent in the movement, then we would take that as a valid endorsement of what they were trying to do. But the main thing was, how many activists and how ambitious is your plan, and tell us the detail of how you're going to spend the money. The result of that has been that over the past 10 months since we launched publicly on the 6th of June last year, over these 10 months we've had 84 applications. Of these we have turned down quite a few for a variety of reasons. We've partially funded quite a large number, and we've fully funded, again, a large number. Very roughly, you could say about a third in each of these categories.
Right. Going by the ones that were successful and fully funded, but what sort of average donation would you say that they received? Do you know that figure off the top of your head?
We put a threshold at £500,
mm-hmm.
and only in a few cases have people come to us with something very specific for a smaller sum that they wanted, and usually they've been granted. But £500 is the kind of starting level for a smallish yes group. Bigger yes groups or conglomerations of yes groups, which we prefer, who are going to have a hub and will look after smaller yes groups in their area. That applies to the Highlands, for example. Then we've given much larger sums. We've also given to a number of individuals who did projects, and the one I like to quote there is Leslie Riddoch and her Nation video series.
Excellent, yeah.
These videos have been a remarkable success. If you add the 3 different videos up, I suppose there are overlaps that the same people will be watching some of them, but I think she's had over 100,000 views when you put them all together. Now, we were very proud to have her as virtually our first project that we funded. She phoned me up one day and told me, I'd already heard about the project, but she told me, if I don't get a yes today, then I'm having to cancel the trip to the Faroe Islands. And I just couldn't let it go. I said, well, the SIF isn't set up yet, but I'll underwrite you. And so anyway,
that was very generous.
We ended up giving her £4,000.
Because they came at the start of, shall we say, this build-up of a campaign that we've had over the last year, and showing 3 independent countries, well, though the Faroes not fully independent, they're halfway there, but showing what a smaller country could do. And I've seen all 3 films, and they're fantastically produced by Phantom Power. They've done a great job and put a great message out of educating people in film.
They're really inspirational in so many ways. And the several things about that whole project that really appealed to me. First of all, Leslie Riddoch is a remarkably good interviewer and speaker. Secondly, she had only this plan to go to the Faroes at first and a vague idea that she'd go elsewhere after that. She came back from the Faroes, and within 2 weeks she had edited that film, and it was, I think, about half an hour long. She'd thrown up a crowdfunder and started to go around the country showing the film and advertising it and making it available on YouTube and so on. Within 3 weeks, she had £25,000 from that crowdfunder.
Yep.
And that's just such a beautiful model for the SIF.
Exactly, that you're putting something in, but then the group can take over and build up. Because
we call that seed money. So we put in a seed of 4,000, and up comes 6 times as much.
Uh-huh.
And we really love that one. And we've done that more than once. We don't do it for every project by any means.
Well, obviously, Leslie Riddick has got a lot of professional credential behind it that would give you the confidence. But what about where you're investing in a project or an application where there's no history, but the idea looks perfectly sound?
Uh-huh.
And could you give me an example of something like that, which has actually turned out to be a great success story?
Yeah, the next one of the, I suppose it was a month or 6 weeks on, that Michael Gray came to us. Michael Gray, bright young man with a pal who's a similarly bright young guy. The two of them wanted to run little sort of miniature question time events where they would just have video microphones and an audience of 30 odd people. They called it the Scotia Project. And the Scotia Project asked for a humble £2,000 to get started, to hire a hall, get in these people and do the video stuff and the recording and all that. £2,000 was ridiculously modest. And he did it, and it was brilliantly successful. If you watch it, I think you can still watch it. He put up a crowdfunder and got 8 times more than we had given him.
Well done.
So that was the seed principle working absolutely brilliantly.
Could you give me an example where why would a group be knocked back on funds? Because obviously it's a learning curve. Is it just a duplication of something that's already been done, or? Yeah,
I'll say something about duplication in a minute, but sometimes it was a duplication, and it was obvious that people weren't talking to each other, and they maybe came from the next constituency or something. But some were knocked back because there was an element of personal gain that might have come from it, and we certainly didn't want to have that. Some were just downright kind of hairy ideas that seemed to us not really going to contribute much to the independence movement. Quite a lot of them were obviously thought up on the back of an envelope, in a bumpy bus, and they needed further work, further development, and repeatedly we've sent them back for, please specify this, please enlarge on that, please give us some evidence for how you think this will work.
Because it's obviously quite disappointing for someone to actually get knocked back. So that's why I'm just addressing that point of the movement. So has there been a learning curve, not only for people applying, but also for the SIF, of what you could do to bridge that gap to make sure that applications are sound from day one, and to help them with advice of what should be included?
I guess you're right in both elements, that the applicants have learned from experience. They've obviously talked to people. They've spoken sometimes to members of our board. There are 4 of us on the board. They've, in some cases, just grassroots. The word has got around, this is how to do it. And probably rumours like, oh, well, if you ask for twice as much as you really want, you might get half.
I've heard that in numerous circles, but nothing to do with SAF. But
I suspect there's a bit of that goes on, but we're fly for that. We've seen it.
Yeah.
So we've sent back a lot of applications, but usually they come back again in a few weeks.
Right. Now, the ones that have been half successful, where you've done a proportion of what they were asking for, how is the success of those? Because that's obviously been an initial cash boost that a group needed. What sort of feedback have you had on the success from the distribution of those funds?
We get feedback by word of mouth. We get a very important feedback is that we demand that any leaflets they put out or any publicity that they put out must include the SIF logo, in the hope that this will encourage more contributions, because we need more money. We can't keep doling it out without getting some back.
You're not a bottomless pit. You're not a bottomless pit. So really, what would you ask then? Here's an opportunity on Indie Live Radio, on the Indie Pram podcast. Give your best sales pitch, please, Willie, on how can people help the Scottish Independence Foundation?
Well, it is. We've kept it very focused on the money. We're there to fund the grassroots if their applications meet with our criteria, and we've been doing that for 10 months. We've dished out about £80,000 already. We've spent a little bit on overheads, but we've now, some of the most recent donations or donors have volunteered to say, here's my check, but I'll cover this expense or that expense. And we are now able to say to people that every pound that's contributed from now on will go back out in helping grassroots to fund things. Yeah. And that's quite a rare thing for a charity to be able to say, in a sense, we're a charitable organisation. Yeah. And we're now able to say every pound goes out. All sorts of donations in kind, everything from the coffee and the bacon rolls that we provide in this house to give to the board members every Wednesday morning. All sorts of daft little donations have saved us having to dip into the funds to dilute the donations.
What sort of effect do you think the last year would have had as far as grassroots is concerned without the assistance of the SIF?
Well, I like to think that we're not just dishing out money, we're dishing out confidence, we're dishing out encouragement, we're dishing out ideas in a way. Now, we have a strict rule that we don't commission anything. We don't say to a yes group, we'll give you money if you do this or you do that. Mm-hmm. We don't commission stuff, but we do know that the advice that we give, there's a subtle difference between commissioning and giving advice. The advice we give has definitely improved the quality of applications, and that in turn means that groups are now becoming more focused on what they should be doing around the place. So we've given advice which I think is important. It's kind of intangible, the result of that, but we now find that there's a higher percentage of applications are successful. People are focusing on the things that we think are worth focusing on. The thing that gives us a great deal of satisfaction is getting in 2 or 3 or more applications that all sound very similar, and we have the pleasure of putting these people in touch with each other. We've done that in Aberdeen. Aberdeen had 2 separate arms to the Yes movement, and they weren't talking to each other. And so it's happening slowly that we're knocking heads together and encouraging them to talk to each other. And in your line of work, Ray, in broadcasting, we had applications from, I think 6 different sources, Indie Live and this one and that one, asking us for microphones and video cameras and all sorts of technical gear that we didn't even understand. And we thought, why are we paying for all this gear to go to sometimes people who are working a few miles apart? There should be sharing of equipment, sharing of ideas, sharing of ambitions. So what we did a couple of months ago, we organised a broadcasters conference, and we invited not just the people who'd been asking for money, but various other people, like a very well-known presenter from STV, and we're trying to get the broadcasters to all talk to each other so that they can come up with good ideas, practical ideas that are within the spending power of SIF to fund things. So we've actually, I think, only spent maybe 50 quid to hire a hall so far on that, but we like the idea that we can get people to talk to each other about things that really can make a difference.
Right. You've obviously seen a vast number of different types of applications, and probably for some tasks that you'd never even imagined yourself. Now, considering all these applications and the experience that the foundation has built up, is there anything that you've not seen that you had expected to see being applied for? Or has the ingenuity of all the various grassroots groups met with your estimation?
Satisfaction. Yeah, I've found it very satisfying seeing the ideas that came in. I mean, some were a bit predictable, and in fact, most of them are a bit predictable now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's lovely to see a bit of initiative and bright ideas coming, especially from younger people. It's not difficult to find younger people than me, but very satisfying. The seed funding is the thing that really turned me on at first, and the idea that we could, for almost no cost at all, get people who know what they're talking about to talk to each other, and that to build up teams and build up bigger organisations is so satisfying.
Any stories on a big recipient of the funds, Willie?
Yeah, the two biggest recipients, and I'll not name sums involved, but big sums, have gone to iMail. iMail have been responsible for the Indie Kit. Now, iMail were easy to make a decision on funding because they had a track record. For several years, they have been raising money through crowdfunders and putting leaflets and stuff in boxes, stickers, badges, all this stuff in boxes and sending it out to yes groups. But iMail were able to gear up several years and send out hundreds, literally 200 indie kits to groups all around the country. And we funded quite a big bit of that. They raised some of it themselves, but we funded quite a lot. And that's really gearing up and giving the most humble yes group leaflets, stickies, badges, flags, all the stuff they need to sell at stalls, and getting a lot of inspiration and encouragement out, as well as
and pamphlets funding as well for the public to take information from.
Yes,
as well.
leaflets of all sorts of different varieties.
My own yes group has been a recipient of the benefits of that, and it is exceptional quality.
So that was the big indie kit, and in a couple of weeks from now there'll be a mini kit on offer, and all that yes groups have to do is to pay for the distribution. It'll be something like 16, 20 quid, and they'll get a small selection of hopefully more focused leaflets than the last lot that went out. So that's been one big recipient, and the other big recipient has been Business for Scotland. And as you know, Gordon McIntyre Kemp, that absolute dynamo of the independence industry, one of the very few people who has been working non-stop every week since 2012 when he started. He's never given up, and he's built up an organisation with good funding and lots of activities. He's initiated the ambassador scheme, which is helping to train people as activists to go out and talk to just the man in the street to convince them of the benefits of independence.
Because behind that company is a lot of research and good figures. If you are discussing, can't say the word arguing because never argue with someone, but if you're having a discussion over details, certainly post 2014, we're always calling now for accurate information, and Business for Scotland is an excellent supplier of that.
Yes.
But it's also in the art of communication. I can say that because I've taken the Ambassador for Independence course myself and benefited from the contribution that SAF has funded, as many others in Scotland have done, and hopefully many more will, so that we feel more confident in the language that we talk. We speak about when we're talking about different facts of the wealth of Scotland, the nation, and the viability of Scotland as a future independent country.
Yeah. Business for Scotland now claims to be one of the biggest political think tanks in the whole UK, and that's quite an achievement. You know, they have several employees that are funded from the business people contributing, and on the back of that they run a dinner and this educational program, and they provide an answer when the BBC or other organisations want to hear a discussion that is balanced from the other side of the Institute of Directors, for example, or the CBI. The CBI were very voluble during the independence referendum in 2014, and Gordon McIntyre Kemp and Business for Scotland were really quite successful in knocking back many of the stupid Project Fear things that came out from the CBI.
And also probably the oil industry in particular from the northeast. I was just watching the programme that was aired on BBC in 2013. It's still on YouTube, and it's quite an eye-opener of regarding
that was the one that the
40s field had opened. There was their explorations where they were looking at the values of the dollar of the barrel was, and how much it would go, and
west of Shetland stuff that was quietly.
There was nothing spoken about the West of Shetland.
David Cameron went out to the West of Shetland incognito to see it.
Yeah. I remember when that happened, everyone was saying, why is he up in Shetland? It was a few years later before we found out.
Of course, the story this time about the oil industry has to be reframed very considerably.
Well, so much so because in that particular programme it was talking about the power of the Council of Shetland and how the councillor, I've forgotten his name now, but he was a very hard negotiator that he wanted. They
were very successful in getting their hands on
Sullen Voe. And then the situation now in the West of Shetland is that they're taking the oil straight onto tankers and taking them straight to Europe and bypassing Sullen Voe.
Yeah.
A kick in the teeth for Shetlanders. Right, Willie, we were talking earlier on about the NHS VS group that you founded 5 years ago. Would you like to go into a bit more detail on why you started it up and how it's running?
Yeah, that really came from the fact that I'm a pharmacist myself. I still was a practicing pharmacist during 2013-14. And I am what's called a pharmacy contractor to the health board in Glasgow. A pharmacy contractor is, in a sense, he's an independent operator running a business, but most of them, including myself, are heavily dependent on National Health Service dispensing. On the basis of being a pharmacist, I felt there was this huge and highly successful organisation, NHS Scotland, which not only employed 162,000 people in Scotland, who are all voters, of course, not only employed all these people, but these people have a vested interest in the success of NHS Scotland. And in 2013-14, you'll remember the TTIP, this treaty or pact that was going to be set up in such a way that the Americans could virtually invade Britain with their healthcare companies and help to privatise the health service in England. Health service in England is being privatised slowly, and that started in 2012 with the Health and Social Care Act. Here was a piece of legislation that applied only to England because the health services are completely separate. And thank goodness it applied only in England, because it gave an open door to healthcare companies to bid for contracts from the National Health Service in England and Wales. Now, we could see that developing from 2012 onwards. It became obvious in the succeeding years that it was going to progress. The Health Secretary to the UK government no longer has a responsibility to provide health care. He's only there as a kind of overseer to make sure that somebody is doing all the various millions of jobs that need to be done. So every contract that NHS England puts out now to tender has to be offered to the private sector as well as to the established NHS in England, which is also a huge organisation and has all the sort of hardware in the shape of hospitals and clinics and all the stuff you need to run a health service. But every time they need something more, or they want to privatise or offer for privatisation, they have to put out a contract to tender, and private companies come in and offer. The companies that have now become heavy operators in NHS England include people like Capita, Serco, Virgin Healthcare, and these are big companies which, to begin with, have just taken on contracts like hospital cleaning or provision of sterile gear to operating theatres. But then within a few years they were offered things like running an entire hospital, or recruitment of nurses, recruitment of GPs, recruitment of consultants. These kind of elements have been put out to tender, and in quite a number of cases have been taken up. The first hospital, and as far as I know, the last hospital which was put out to private tender, ended up in disaster. And after 2 or 3 years, Hinchingbrook Hospital, under the control of a private company, basically handed back the keys and said, sorry, we can't do it. And that was the most tremendous waste of money. But I'm afraid, because of the legislation, privatisation is creeping up on NHS England quite rapidly. We now know that there's approaching £11 billion worth of contracts have been taken on by the private sector. And that sounds, it sounds worrying enough. But there's the recent case where Richard Branson, in the shape of Virgin Healthcare, became so annoyed that he felt he hadn't been properly offered the chance to compete for a large contract, that he sued the health board in whatever county it was.
It was Sussex, was it? Sorry.
Wherever it was, and
Down the south.
he won the case.
Yeah.
So the health board had to waste taxpayers' money trying to defend this mistake, I suppose, that they made, and then had to pay out more money to Richard Branson because he won the case. This kind of nonsense
Waste of money.
is just appalling. And it may be small beer in terms of the huge budget of the health Department of Health in England, but it's the kind of thing that we really could do without in Scotland. So NHS Scotland and the Scottish Government has put a lot of effort and energy into making sure that we don't allow privatisation of that sort to creep in Scotland. But the successor to TTIP, and it should be noted, TTIP ended up sinking below the waves because of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
They took up negotiation of TTIP with the Americans, and they ended up dropping the whole idea.
Yep.
Because there were so many elements of it that the European Commission disliked. And while they get a lot of bad press, this was one of the best decisions they ever made. But now we're at 2019, and now the UK government is proceeding along the privatisation road for the English and Welsh health services. They're looking across the Atlantic again and saying, oh, we need to get a trade deal with America. And Mr. Trump is replying, yeah, sure, we'll give you a trade deal. And sadly, America has lots of things to offer us as exports. And Britain doesn't have a lot of exports that we can offer them. At least England doesn't. But we have healthcare that we can offer them. So NHS England will be offering contracts to American healthcare companies with open arms. They've got the legislation to back it up. The American healthcare companies are very good at this kind of thing. They will know where to come in and take the richest pickings.
Yep.
Before we know it, we'll have more and more private health care in England, as if we didn't have enough with Bupa and so on. So the prospect of Theresa May's health partnership with America is really quite daunting. The threat to Scotland is that once American healthcare companies come in and get stuck into the English health system, they will look north of the border and try to find ways of doing the same up north. And one of the key provisions of the Westminster legislation, which steals the powers that should have come back to Holyrood from Brussels, is the provision of public procurement. That's the word I'm looking for. So procurement obviously stretches to healthcare, and if Westminster is retaining that power, then we will be powerless in Scotland if we don't get independence. will be powerless to prevent privatisation of procurement of vast quantities of drugs, equipment, and so on that NHS Scotland would like to purchase at the best terms, not at the terms offered by American companies.
So NHS for Yes has got a big message to get out there, and
yeah, that's rather a long way of describing
or at least showing
one of the
support.
trends in
Showing
NHS
support.
for Yes. NHS for Yes is very active in this area of protecting NHS Scotland against privatisation. The other thing that we try to protect against is the constant criticism and often unjustified sniping from the opposition political parties. The fact that Richard Leonard can stand up and expose one case of one person who's suffered some dreadful outcome from surgery or from whatever it is, from the failure in some way of the health service in Scotland, is really reprehensible. You know, the health service is treating thousands, nay, tens of thousands of people every day, and to pick out one individual who's had a problem is really a bit below the belt. Ruth Davidson, when she's on her high horse, is pretty good at this kind of thing as well. So we try to get letters to the newspapers and such like. We try to rebut the vicious criticism that comes from the other political parties.
Well, good luck in that endeavour.
He's pretty thankless.
Well, Willie, it's been great to talk to you today. I hope we can do another podcast in the future. But for now, from the Indie Pram podcast on Indie Live Radio, Willie Wilson, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Ray.
Indie Prime, yes, Indie Prime, on Indie Live Radio. Indie Prime.